Wait a second! As I was saying, here's something new from Pepsi.
You can cash this.
Just buy any Pepsi product, look under their caps.
On the night of May 25th, 1992, an unemployed mother of 5 sat inside her tin-roofed home in Manila. Her name was Victoria Angelo.
Run, and get your cash crown.
Her husband earned around $4 a day transporting passengers through the city in a 3-wheeled cab. But for several weeks, the family had been buying Pepsi and saving every bottle cap. Because one of these worthless pieces of metal could be worth 1 million pesos. Enough to buy a house, enough to send their children to college, enough to change the rest of their lives. That evening, 349 was announced as Pepsi's winning number. Victoria looked down at her table. She had it.
We are millionaire.
But Victoria wasn't the only winner. The same celebration was happening in thousands of homes across the country. By the following morning, crowds were surrounding Pepsi factories. The company locked its gates and placed barricades outside. Pepsi had prepared for a handful of winners. Instead, it was facing hundreds of thousands of people holding the same number. Within a year, trucks would be burned, thousands of lawsuits would be filed, and 5 deaths would be linked to the violence surrounding the dispute. So how could Pepsi announce a winning number and then claim that almost everyone holding it had lost? The answer was hidden beneath 349, in a code almost nobody noticed. To understand how one number caused so much damage, we first have to understand what Pepsi was trying to accomplish. In the early 1990s, the Philippines was one of Asia's largest soft drink markets, and Pepsi had a problem. Coca-Cola controlled most of the market. Pepsi needed something dramatic, something that would convince millions of people to choose its bottles instead. The solution came from a promotion Pepsi had already tested in Latin America. It was called Number Fever. Under specially marked caps, customers could find 3 things: a 3-digit number, a cash prize, and an alphanumeric security code. Every weekday, Pepsi would announce a winning 3-digit number through television, radio, and newspapers. If the number under your cap matched the announcement, you could take it to a Pepsi redemption center and receive the amount printed beside it. At least, that was how most customers understood it. Most prizes were relatively small, but the largest was 1 million pesos, approximately $40,000 at the time. For an ordinary Filipino family, this wasn't simply extra spending money. It could represent decades of income. It could pay for a house, an education, or the beginning of an entirely different life. On January 15, 1992, Pepsi Cola Products Philippines formally requested government permission to launch the promotion. 8 days later, the Department of Trade and Industry approved it, but selecting the winning numbers required secrecy. So Pepsi hired a Mexican consulting company called DG Consultores. The company used a computer to pre-select the winning 3-digit numbers and match them with unique security codes. Those codes were important. They allowed Pepsi to distinguish genuine winning caps from counterfeits or caps that had been altered. But Pepsi didn't simply keep the list inside its own office. The complete list of winning combinations was placed inside a safety deposit box at a bank in Makati. Opening the box required 2 keys. One belonged to Pepsi, the other belonged to the Philippine government. Neither side could open it alone. On paper, the system appeared almost impossible to manipulate. Number Fever began on February 17th. Pepsi, 7-Up, Mirinda, and Mountain Dew bottles carrying the promotional caps were distributed throughout the country. Every evening, families gathered around their televisions and radios. A number appeared. People searched through their collections, and somewhere in the Philippines, someone discovered they had won. The campaign worked. More than 51,000 prizes were reportedly claimed during its original run. 17 people won 1 million pesos and appeared in Pepsi's advertisements. Sales of Pepsi's participating drinks increased by approximately 40%. For the company, Number Fever looked like a perfect marketing campaign. People weren't simply buying Pepsi because they wanted a drink. They were buying the possibility that the next bottle could change their lives. Number Fever was originally scheduled to end on May 8th, but with sales rising, ending it made little sense. So Pepsi extended the campaign for another 5 weeks. 25 additional winning numbers would be selected, new caps would be distributed, and the winning announcements would continue until June 12th. The extension should have created more winners, more publicity, and more sales. But somewhere inside the list of numbers, a mistake had already been made. A number that existed on hundreds of thousands of losing caps was about to be announced as a winner.
During the original Number Fever campaign, Pepsi divided 1,000 possible 3-digit numbers into separate groups. Approximately 60 were selected as winners. More than 500 were used on non-winning caps, and roughly 400 remained unused. When Pepsi extended the promotion, DG Consultores was supposed to choose 25 additional winners from the unused group. One of the numbers selected for the extension was 349. On May 25th, Pepsi announced it as the winning number for the following day. But almost immediately, reports began arriving from redemption centers across the country. There were far too many winners. Not 10, not 100, hundreds of thousands. Contemporary reports suggested that as many as 800,000 caps marked 349 may have entered circulation. Pepsi later blamed the situation on a computer software glitch that had allowed enormous quantities of additional 349 caps to be printed. But the problem was more complicated than one incorrect television announcement, because 349 genuinely appeared on the official list of winning numbers. The number itself was correct. What separated a winning 349 cap from a losing one was the much smaller code printed beside it. For example, the official master list included a 349 cap carrying the code V-2421-JC. That combination was worth 50,000 pesos. Other valid 349 codes were worth 10,000, 1,000, or 100 pesos. But many of the people arriving at Pepsi facilities held caps carrying completely different codes. Two appeared repeatedly: L-2560-FQ and L-3560-FQ. Those codes were not on the winning list. Both caps were genuine. Both displayed 349. Both could have a prize printed underneath. But according to Pepsi's internal system, only the cap with the correct security code was a winner. To the company, this distinction was obvious. To customers, it looked like an excuse invented after the mistake had been discovered. Pepsi argued that its advertisements had always required 3 matching elements: the number, the prize, and the authenticated security code. The code wasn't merely decoration, it was part of the winning combination. But many claimants interpreted the promotion differently. They believed the security code existed only to prove that a cap was genuine and hadn't been counterfeited. Their caps were genuine. The number was genuine. The prize printed beneath them was genuine. And Pepsi itself had announced 349 on national television. From their perspective, they had followed every instruction they had been given. Then the company changed the meaning of those instructions after they won. This was the central conflict that would keep Number Fever alive for more than a decade. Pepsi saw a technical authentication system, the customers saw a promise, and the same piece of metal appeared to support both interpretations. When Pepsi realized what was happening, it attempted to recall 349 and temporarily replaced it with another number, 134. But this only created more confusion. First, the company had announced 349. Then it said 349 was wrong. Then it admitted that some 349 caps were valid after all. On May 28th, Pepsi and the Department of Trade and Industry used their separate keys to open the safety deposit box. Inside was the official master list, It confirmed that 349 was a winning number, but only with a small group of specific security codes. The hundreds of thousands of caps carrying codes such as L-2560-FQ and L-3560-FQ were officially classified as non-winning. But explaining the system did not make the crowds disappear. Many claimants weren't interested in hearing that a smaller line of letters invalidated the much larger number Pepsi had told them to watch. Some had already celebrated with their families. Others had borrowed money, promised gifts, or begun making plans for a future they could never otherwise afford. For one night, they had believed they were rich. Now Pepsi was telling them their prize was worth nothing. The company had to decide what to do next, and none of its options were good. Pepsi had three possible responses. It could pay every claimant the amount printed beneath their cap, it could refuse all caps carrying the wrong security codes, or it could offer a smaller payment to make the problem disappear. The first option was impossible. The caps carried different prize amounts, but many displayed enormous sums. Even a fraction of the disputed claims could have exposed Pepsi to a liability far beyond the entire value of the promotion. The second option was legally stronger, but immediately rejecting hundreds of thousands of customers could transform a printing error into a national public relations disaster. So, during a pre-dawn crisis meeting, Pepsi chose the third option. The company offered 500 pesos for every 349 cap carrying a non-winning code. The payment was described as a goodwill gesture. Pepsi was not admitting that these caps had won. It was simply offering compensation for the confusion. For someone earning only a few dollars a day, 500 pesos was not meaningless, but it was nowhere near the amount printed on many of the caps. If a cap displayed a 1 million peso prize, Pepsi's offer represented only 0.05% of what the customer believed they had won. To the company, it was a compromise. To many claimants, it was an insult. Still, enormous numbers of people accepted. Philippine court records state that more than 486,000 disputed 349 caps were submitted for the payment. The gesture cost Pepsi approximately 240 million pesos, around $9 to $10 million at the time. The original promotional prize budget had reportedly been only $2 million. Pepsi had now spent several times that amount compensating people it maintained had never won. And the crisis still wasn't over. Some cap holders accepted the payment and moved on. Others refused. To them, accepting 500 pesos meant surrendering a claim worth thousands, or possibly 1 million. Organizations such as Coalition 349 and Ugnayan 349 formed to coordinate the claimants. Members organized boycotts, printed anti-Pepsi material, and gathered outside the company's offices. Demand letters began arriving, then lawsuits. By July 1993, more than 22,000 people had reportedly joined 689 civil cases against Pepsi. More than 5,200 criminal complaints alleging fraud and deception had also been filed. The company faced legal actions across the country. Pepsi argued that the correct security code had always been essential. Claimants argued that Pepsi couldn't escape its public announcement by pointing to a condition ordinary customers had never properly understood. The argument was no longer about a marketing promotion. It was about whether a global corporation could make a mistake, create hundreds of thousands of apparent winners, and then decide that those winners had misunderstood the rules. Most demonstrations remained peaceful. People carried 349 signs, demanded payment, and called for a national boycott. But as the legal fight continued, anger hardened. Pepsi facilities were barricaded. Executives received death threats. Armed guards began riding alongside delivery drivers. Then the first attacks began. Across the Philippines, Pepsi trucks and buildings became physical symbols of the dispute. At least 32 delivery trucks were reportedly stoned, overturned, or set on fire. Molotov cocktails and homemade explosives were thrown at plants and company offices.
Pepsi executives began using bodyguards, changing their daily schedules and limiting their travel. The promotion had ended months earlier, but the number 349 was becoming more dangerous. On February 13, 1993, a fragmentation grenade was thrown toward a parked Pepsi truck. It struck the vehicle, bounced away, and exploded among nearby bystanders. A school teacher was killed. So was a 5-year-old girl. 6 other people were wounded. Neither victim had created the promotion. Neither had printed the caps. And neither was responsible for Pepsi's refusal to pay. They were simply standing close to the target. In the following months, another grenade was thrown into a Pepsi facility in Davao. 3 company employees were killed. The widely reported number of deaths connected with the unrest had reached 5. But responsibility for the attacks was never as simple as the headlines suggested. Pepsi portrayed the violence as terrorism and extortion. Some officials suspected radical members of the claimant groups. Others suggested that rival businesses might be exploiting Pepsi's weakness. There were even allegations that some attacks had been staged to discredit the protesters. These theories were disputed, and no single explanation conclusively established who was responsible for every attack. What could be established was the target: Pepsi trucks, Pepsi factories, Pepsi employees. Number Fever had transformed the company's branding into something people associated with a broken promise. For Pepsi, this was especially damaging because the promotion had originally depended on trust. Customers had no way to inspect the master list. They couldn't independently verify the codes. They bought the drinks because they trusted Pepsi and the government to operate the system honestly. When the system failed, the company responded with an explanation that was technically detailed but emotionally useless. The customers could see their number. They could see the prize. They could see the Pepsi logo. What they couldn't see was why the smaller code should erase everything else. Eventually, the violence declined, but the lawsuits continued. Across the Philippines, different courts were asked the same deceptively simple question. What legally made a bottle cap a winner? The number announced on television? The amount printed beneath it? Or a security code hidden in the master list? The answer would take years.
For the claimants, the case appeared straightforward. Pepsi made a public offer. It announced 349 as the winning number. Customers possessed genuine caps carrying 349. The prize amounts were printed directly beneath those caps. Therefore, Pepsi should pay. But Pepsi argued that the offer had never consisted of the number alone. A valid entry required 3 matching elements: the announced number, the prize denomination. Before Number Fever, this cap was almost worthless. A thin piece of stamped metal designed to keep gas inside a bottle. Pepsi transformed it into something else: a lottery ticket, a contract, a promise that buying one more drink could change everything. For families like Victoria Angelo's, 1 million pesos wasn't an abstract marketing figure. It was a home they didn't have, an education they couldn't afford, and a future that seemed impossible until 3 numbers appeared on television. Number Fever succeeded because people trusted Pepsi enough to believe that future was real. And it failed because, when hundreds of thousands of people claimed it, Pepsi showed them a smaller line of letters and told them they had never actually won. To Pepsi, the disputed caps were worth 500 pesos as a gesture of goodwill. To the courts, they were worth nothing. But to the people holding them on the night of May 25, 1992, they had briefly been worth an entirely different life. The courts eventually settled what number 349 was legally worth. They never settled what people believed Pepsi had taken from them.